The truth hung heavy in the air like a noose, as Josephine Rollins stood defiant before the town council of Redemption Creek, Montana Territory. 1873, her auburn hair and fierce green eyes, a stark contrast to the sea of scowling men who condemned her with their gaze long before their verdict. Miss Rollins, you have been found guilty of spreading falsehoods against the most respected men of this town. Your newspaper articles accusing Mayor Williams and his associates of land theft, fraud, and intimidation are without evidence and designed to incite discord. Judge Harrington's voice boomed through the town hall, though Josephine noted he couldn't meet her eyes as he spoke. You will cease publication of the Redemption Creek Herald immediately, surrender your printing press, and vacate town limits within 3 days. Josephine clutched the leather-bound notebook containing her meticulous records of testimonies from farmers who'd lost their land, widows who'd been cheated out of mining claims, and merchants who'd paid protection fees. Her voice didn't waver as she responded, "These aren't falsehoods, Your Honor, they're documented facts. The people deserve to know the truth about the men who govern them." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Some faces showed sympathy, but most averted their eyes. They knew she spoke the truth, but truth was a luxury few could afford in a town where the mayor and his cronies controlled everything from water rights to the marshal's office. Silence. Mayor Williams stood, his expensive suit and gold watch gleaming in the lantern light. This decision is final. If you're found within town limits after sunset 3 days hence, you'll face imprisonment for criminal libel. Josephine's throat tightened as she looked around the room. These were her neighbors, people who had subscribed to her newspaper, who had shared meals with her. Now they sat mute as she was exiled for daring to print what many whispered but none would say aloud. "Then I'll take my leave," she said, gathering what dignity remained to her. "But know this silencing me won't bury the truth. It just plants it like a seed that will grow elsewhere." 3 days later, Josephine sat atop her wagon at the edge of town, her printing press dismantled and loaded alongside her meager possessions. She had no destination in mind, only a determination to continue her work somewhere beyond the reach of Redemption Creek's corrupt elite. Her father had taught her the newspaper business before consumption took him 2 years prior, leaving her the press and a belief that words could change the world. Now those words had cost her everything. As she urged her horses forward, Josephine glanced back once at the town that had been her home for 5 years. The setting sun painted the clapboard buildings in fiery orange, almost as if Redemption Creek itself was ablaze. Perhaps it should be, she thought grimly, turning her attention to the long road ahead. 50 miles and 3 days later, Josephine's wagon creaked to a halt. One wheel had splintered on the rocky trail, and her water supply was dangerously low. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly around her, beautiful but unforgiving. "Damn it all," she muttered, climbing down to assess the damage. The wheel couldn't be repaired without tools she didn't possess. Night was falling, and the howl of distant wolves sent a chill down her spine. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her reach for the small revolver tucked in her belt. Out here, strangers could mean salvation or danger, and she'd learned the hard way not to trust easily. A lone rider appeared around the bend, silhouetted against the dusky sky. As he drew closer, Josephine made out a tall man atop a chestnut gelding. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he wore the practical attire of a rancher or cowhand rather than the flashy gear of a gunslinger. "Evening, madam," he called, stopping a respectful distance away. "Looks like you've got yourself in a predicament." "I've managed worse," she replied, hand still on her revolver. He dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a life lived in the saddle. "Name's Gabriel Zane. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here." He nodded toward her broken wheel. "I can help fix that if you're agreeable. Not safe for anyone to be stranded out here after dark." Josephine studied him carefully. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a clear winter sky. Nothing in his demeanor suggested threat, but experience had taught her caution. "Josephine Rollins," she finally offered. I'd appreciate the help, Mr. Zane, but I can pay my own way. A slight smile crossed his face, revealing a dimple in one cheek. Never suggested otherwise, Miss Rollins. He moved toward the wheel, keeping his movements deliberate and unhurried. Where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking? Wherever my horses take me, she answered, the bitterness in her voice impossible to hide. Gabriel glanced at her loaded wagon, his eyes lingering on the disassembled printing press. You're a long way from anywhere with a use for that equipment. That's rather the point, Josephine said, watching as he examined the broken wheel. I can't fix this here, he concluded, but I've got what we need at my ranch. You're welcome to shelter there tonight and we can repair it in the morning. Josephine hesitated. Accepting help from a stranger, a man went against every instinct for self-preservation she'd developed. But the distant howls were growing closer, and she knew her options were limited. Very well, Mr. Zane, lead the way. Gabriel helped secure her belongings and hitched her horses to his own mount so they could pull the damaged wagon. As they traveled, the landscape transformed from scrubby plains to rolling hills dotted with pine. The night air grew crisp, carrying the scent of juniper and sage. You picked a beautiful stretch of country to break down in, Gabriel commented, though I reckon that's small comfort at the moment. Beauty is rarely as practical as one might hope, Josephine replied, but found herself admiring the silver-tipped mountains that loomed ahead, ghostly in the moonlight. An hour later, they crested a hill to reveal a valley below. A sturdy log ranch house stood surrounded by several outbuildings, with corrals and a small barn nearby. Lamplight glowed from the windows and smoke curled from the stone chimney. It's not much, Gabriel said, but it's home. Josephine was struck by the quiet pride in his voice. It looks. She searched for the right word. Substantial, he chuckled. High praise indeed. As they approached, the front door of the house swung open and an elderly woman appeared, her silver hair gathered in a practical bun. You're late for supper, Gabriel, she called, then noticed Josephine. And you've brought company. Martha, this is Miss Josephine Rollins, Gabriel explained as he helped Josephine down from the wagon. Her wheel broke about 5 miles south. Miss Rollins, this is Martha Cooper, the closest thing to a mother I've had since I was 12. You poor dear, Martha said, coming forward to take Josephine's arm. Come inside before you catch your death. Gabriel can tend to your things. Before she could protest, Josephine found herself ushered into the warmth of the ranch house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and bookshelves that surprised her with their abundance of volumes. Sit, Martha insisted, guiding her to a chair at the kitchen table. You look half frozen and wholly exhausted. When did you last eat a proper meal? Josephine couldn't actually remember. The days since her expulsion had blurred together. That's what I thought, Martha clucked, ladling stew into a bowl. Eat, questions can wait until you're warm and fed. The stew was rich with venison and root vegetables, the best thing Josephine had tasted in days. As warmth spread through her body, the tension she'd carried since leaving Redemption Creek began to ease, if only slightly. Gabriel entered, removing his hat and hanging it by the door. Your horses are fed and watered and your wagon secure, he told Josephine. We'll see about that wheel first thing tomorrow. Thank you, she said, suddenly acutely aware of her disheveled appearance after days on the trail. Now, Martha said, setting a cup of coffee before her, might I ask what brings a young woman with a printing press into the middle of nowhere, all alone? Josephine's fingers tightened around the warm cup. I was a newspaper editor in Redemption Creek. The town council didn't appreciate my editorial choices. Gabriel raised an eyebrow as he sat across from her. Editorial choices? I printed the truth about certain influential men, Josephine said. They preferred their misdeeds remain private. Ah, Martha nodded. The truth has never been particularly welcome in places where money and power hold sway. Redemption Creek, Gabriel mused. I've heard stories about that place. Mayor Williams has quite a reputation. Josephine looked up sharply. You know of him. Know of him, not know him, Gabriel clarified. His name comes up when ranchers talk about property disputes, never favorably. He's the reason I'm here, Josephine admitted. He and his associates have been systematically seizing land from smaller holders, manipulating records, intimidating those who resist. She hesitated, then added, I have evidence, testimonies, documents, records of suspicious deaths ruled accidents. I published what I could verify. They gave me 3 days to leave town. And seized your newspaper, I'd wager, Martha said softly. They tried. A fierce smile crossed Josephine's face. But my father taught me to dismantle the press quickly if need be. They got the building, but not the means to print. Gabriel studied her with newfound respect. So you're planning to set up elsewhere? That was the idea, Josephine sighed. But I hadn't planned beyond getting away. I'm not sure where I could go that's far enough to be safe, but close enough to still matter. Well, Martha said pragmatically, tonight you're here and that's enough to worry about for now. Let me show you where you can wash up. I've got a spare nightgown that should do, and we can see about laundering your things tomorrow. Later, clean and dressed in Martha's borrowed nightgown, Josephine stood at the window of the small guest room. The Montana night spread vast and star-studded beyond the glass. For the first time in days, she felt something like safety, but it was temporary. Tomorrow her wheel would be fixed and she would need to move on. Where, she didn't know, but the weight of her father's legacy and her own sense of responsibility pressed upon her. The people of Redemption Creek and the surrounding areas deserved to know what was happening. She had promised to be their voice. With a sigh, she opened her notebook and began to write by lamplight. Whatever came next, she would face it with her words as both shield and sword. Gabriel rose before dawn, as was his habit. The first light of day found him in the barn, fashioning a replacement wheel for Josephine's wagon. He worked methodically, his mind on the remarkable woman who'd arrived at his doorstep the previous evening. He'd known many courageous men in his 32 years soldiers, lawmen, frontiersmen who stared down danger without flinching. But there was something about Josephine Rollins' quiet determination that struck him differently. She'd stood alone against powerful men, armed with nothing but truth and conviction. "You're up early," Martha observed, entering the barn with a cup of coffee. "Wheel won't fix itself," he replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "And I suppose you're eager to finish it so our guest can be on her way." Martha's tone was innocent, but her eyes were shrewd. Gabriel focused on his work. "She's made it clear she intends to continue her mission. Who am I to delay her?" "Who indeed?" Martha murmured. "Though I wonder where she thinks she's going. The next town with a need for a newspaper is a hard journey from here, especially for a woman alone. She seems capable. Capable doesn't mean she should have to do everything alone." Martha watched him work for a moment longer. "Your father would have admired her spirit." The mention of his father made Gabriel pause. Thomas Zane had been a man of principle, a former Union soldier who'd come west with dreams of building something that would last. He taught Gabriel that a man's worth was measured not by what he took from the world, but by what he built within it. "Pa would have invited her to stay," Gabriel admitted. "Yes, he would have," Martha smiled. "Breakfast in 20 minutes, don't be late." When Josephine joined them at the breakfast table, she was dressed in her own clothes, freshly laundered and pressed by Martha's efficient hands. Her auburn hair was neatly braided, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there the previous evening. "Mr. Zane," she said as she sat down, "I want to thank you for your hospitality. I'm prepared to compensate you for the repairs and lodging." "Not necessary," Gabriel replied, passing her a plate of biscuits. "Neighbors help neighbors out here, it's how we survive." "I'm hardly a neighbor," Josephine pointed out. "Anyone within a day's ride counts as a neighbor in these parts," Martha interjected, "especially when winter comes." "Still, I don't wish to impose," Josephine insisted. "Once my wagon is repaired, I'll be on my way." Gabriel set down his coffee cup. "And where exactly will that be, Miss Rollins?" The direct question seemed to catch her off guard. I'm considering my options." "Which are?" Josephine's chin lifted in a gesture Gabriel was beginning to recognize as her response to challenge. "I still have contacts in Helena. I might be able to find work at an established newspaper there." "But that's not what you want," Gabriel observed. "What I want and what's possible aren't always aligned, Mr. Zane." Gabriel nodded slowly. "True enough." But sometimes opportunities appear where you least expect them. He hesitated, then continued, "There's a settlement growing about 15 miles north of here. Silver Creek. It started as a mining camp, but it's becoming something more substantial. Nearly 500 people now, with more arriving each month." Josephine's eyes narrowed slightly. And they've got no newspaper," Gabriel said simply. "Folks get news months late, if at all. Letters take forever to reach families back east. There's no record of local events, no way to announce business matters." "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Gabriel replied, "just sharing information that might be relevant to your situation." Martha gave a small snort that she quickly disguised as a cough. "Silver Creek," Josephine repeated thoughtfully. "I've never heard of it." "Most haven't," Gabriel acknowledged. "It's new, growing, finding its feet, kind of place that could use someone who isn't afraid to print the truth." Josephine studied him intently, and Gabriel felt as though those green eyes could see straight through to his motives, which weren't entirely clear even to himself. "Why would you care whether Silver Creek has a newspaper?" she asked finally. Gabriel met her gaze steadily. "I do business there. Ship cattle to the butcher, sell horses to the livery, good people trying to build something worthwhile." And he glanced at the notebook she'd placed beside her plate. "I've seen what happens when corruption goes unchecked. My father lost land that way before he found this place." Something shifted in Josephine's expression. "I'm sorry to hear that. It was a long time ago," Gabriel said, "but I haven't forgotten the lesson." "What Gabriel isn't saying," Martha interjected, "is that he owns a building in Silver Creek. Used to be a feed store before the owner died last winter. It's been sitting empty since." Gabriel shot Martha a look that she blithely ignored. "It would need work," he admitted, "but it has good bones, plenty of room for a printing press and living quarters above." Josephine set down her fork. "Mr. Zane, are you offering me a place to establish a newspaper?" "I'm offering you options, Miss Rollins," Gabriel clarified. "The building needs a tenant. Silver Creek needs a newspaper. You need somewhere to continue your work. Seems like interests might align." "And what would you want in return?" "Reasonable rent, paid when you're able. And perhaps," a slight smile crossed his face, "a favorable mention when I bring my cattle to market." Josephine couldn't help but laugh at that, a genuine sound that transformed her face. "I'm afraid I can't be bought, Mr. Zane, even with kindness." "Wouldn't respect you if you could," Gabriel replied. "The offer stands on its merits. You're welcome to consider it while I finish repairing your wheel." After breakfast, Josephine followed Gabriel to the barn where her wagon stood with the broken wheel removed. A new wheel, freshly crafted, leaned against the wall. "You made that this morning?" she asked, impressed despite herself. Gabriel nodded. "Had the materials on hand?" "We're too far from town to rely on others for basic repairs." As he worked, Josephine found herself studying him. Gabriel Zane wasn't what she'd expected to find in the Montana wilderness. His ranch was well kept, his manner educated without pretension. The bookshelves in his home spoke of a mind that valued knowledge, and the way Martha deferred to him in matters of business suggested he was both competent and fair. "Tell me about Silver Creek," she said suddenly. Gabriel glanced up, his hands still working. "What would you like to know?" "Everything. Who holds power there? What's the economy based on? Are there families or just miners? Is there a school, a church? Getting the lay of the land." He smiled knowingly. "Information is my trade, Mr. Zane." "Fair enough." Gabriel described a growing settlement centered around silver mines but increasingly diverse in its economy. A town council had recently formed, merchants were establishing permanent businesses, and families were putting down roots. "It's not perfect," he concluded. "There's the usual trouble that comes with mining camps, drinking, gambling, the occasional brawl, but there's also a sense that people want something better. And the power structure," Gabriel appreciated her directness, "currently balanced. The mine owners have money but need the merchants and services. The smaller landholders and workers are organizing. No one faction controls everything yet, which makes it interesting." "Interesting," Josephine repeated. "That's one word for it." "It's an opportunity," Gabriel said. "To help shape something from the beginning before corruption takes root." Josephine's expression grew distant. That's what I thought I was doing in Redemption Creek. I arrived when it was still growing, thought I could make a difference. And you did, Gabriel insisted, pausing in his work. You stood against wrongdoing when others wouldn't. That matters, even if it didn't end as you hoped. It ended with me being run out of town, Josephine said bitterly. It ended with you refusing to be silenced, Gabriel corrected. There's a difference. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of a shared value that transcended their brief acquaintance. Your wheel's nearly done, Gabriel said, breaking the moment. Should be ready after midday. Thank you, Josephine replied, turning to leave. Miss Rollins, he called after her. She paused in the doorway. Whatever you decide, I hope you'll consider yourself welcome here. Not everyone fears the truth. By afternoon, the wheel was repaired and the wagon ready for travel. Gabriel loaded the last of Josephine's belongings while Martha pressed a basket of provisions into her hands. Enough food for 3 days, Martha said firmly, and a jar of my wild berry preserves because everyone needs something sweet now and then. Josephine blinked back unexpected tears. You've been exceedingly kind, Mrs. Cooper. Martha, dear, and kindness costs nothing. The older woman embraced her briefly. Remember that you're not alone in this world, even when it feels that way. Gabriel approached, leading Josephine's horses. They're rested and ready, he said. I've drawn you a map to Silver Creek, should you decide to go that direction. The key to the building is with it. He handed her a folded paper. No obligation, just an option. Josephine accepted the map, their fingers brushing. Mr. Zane, Gabriel, he corrected. Gabriel, she acknowledged. I don't know how to properly thank you. Do what you do best, he replied simply. Tell the truth wherever you land. As Josephine climbed onto the wagon seat, she felt a strange reluctance. In just one day, this place had offered more genuine welcome than she'd felt in months at Redemption Creek. But she had a mission, a purpose that required more than the sanctuary of a kind man's ranch. I'll return your key one way or another, she promised. Gabriel nodded, stepping back. Safe travels, Miss Rollins. Josephine, she said. My friends call me Josephine. With that, she urged her horses forward, the wagon rolling smoothly on its new wheel. At the top of the hill, she paused to look back. Gabriel and Martha still stood in the yard, watching her departure. On impulse, she raised her hand in farewell. Then she unfolded the map and studied her options. Silver Creek sprawled across a valley nestled between pine-covered hills, larger than Josephine had expected. Main Street boasted wooden sidewalks fronting an assortment of businesses, a general store, saloon, hotel, livery, and a dozen smaller establishments. People moved purposefully about their business, and the sound of construction echoed from the north end of town. Following Gabriel's directions, Josephine guided her wagon to a sturdy wooden building halfway down Main Street. The faded sign above the door still read Peterson's Feed and Grain, but the windows were dusty and the interior dark. She sat for a moment, considering. The location was ideal, central, visible, accessible. A newspaper here would be at the heart of town life, impossible to ignore. You must be Miss Rollins. Josephine turned to find a gray-haired man with spectacles regarding her with open curiosity. I am, and you are. Harold Jenkins, town clerk and postmaster. He gestured toward a small building across the street that bore a sign reading U.S. Post Office. Gabriel Zane sent word you might be arriving. Josephine raised an eyebrow. Did he now? Came through 2 days ago with a letter, Jenkins confirmed. Said a journalist of considerable talent might be looking to establish a newspaper here. His eyes twinkled. You've caused quite a stir without printing a single page. I haven't decided to stay, Josephine clarified. Well, when you do, Jenkins said, as if her decision was a foregone conclusion, stop by my office. I've got 2 years' worth of town council minutes that should give you a start on understanding our little community. Before she could respond, Jenkins tipped his hat and continued down the street, leaving Josephine bemused. Gabriel had sent word ahead, had he? She wasn't sure whether to be annoyed at his presumption or touched by his faith in her decision. With a sigh, she climbed down from the wagon and approached the building, key in hand. The door swung open with a protesting creak, revealing a cavernous space thick with dust and cobwebs. Streams of light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating bare walls and empty shelves. But Josephine saw beyond the neglect to the possibilities. The main floor was spacious enough for her press, a counter for business, and perhaps a small reading area where townsfolk could gather. The back room could serve as an office and storage space. And according to Gabriel, there were living quarters upstairs. As she explored, Josephine found her mind racing with plans. The press could go by the front window, visible to passers-by. She'd need a sign, of course, and clean newsprint, and stop, she told herself firmly. You haven't decided yet. But even as she said it, Josephine knew she was lying to herself. The moment she'd seen Silver Creek, something had resonated within her. This wasn't Redemption Creek with its established hierarchies and entrenched corruption. This was a community still forming, still deciding what it wanted to be. She could make a difference here. She could help shape the town's identity through her reporting, provide a forum for debate, celebrate achievements, and yes, hold the powerful accountable. It would be hard work. She'd need to win the trust of strangers, rebuild her life from scratch, and face whatever challenges came with being a woman alone in a frontier town. But for the first time since being cast out of Redemption Creek, Josephine felt a spark of genuine hope. She locked the building and climbed back onto her wagon. There was a hotel down the street where she could stay while making preparations. Tomorrow would be soon enough to make her final decision, or so she told herself. 2 weeks later, the Silver Creek Chronicle published its first edition. The headline read, "Silver Creek welcomes new businesses as town expansion continues," with articles detailing recent construction, the formation of a school board, and interviews with newly arrived families. On page 2, a smaller headline caught many readers' attention. Cattle prices rise as Zane Ranch delivers prime stock. The brief article noted the quality of local rancher Gabriel Zane's cattle and his fair dealing with the town butcher. Josephine smiled as she distributed copies throughout town. It wasn't exactly the favorable mention Gabriel had joked about, but it was the truth. His cattle were indeed superior, as several townspeople had confirmed. The newspaper office had been transformed. With help from local carpenters paid in advertising space, the interior now boasted clean walls, repaired flooring, and new shelving. Her printing press occupied a place of honor near the front, while a small counter welcomed visitors. Upstairs, Josephine had created a modest but comfortable living space with furniture purchased from the local carpenter and linens ordered from Helena. The town's response had exceeded her expectations. Subscriptions were building steadily, and businesses eagerly purchased advertising space. Even more gratifying were the visitors who stopped by with stories to share, questions about distant news, or simply to welcome her to Silver Creek. As the afternoon waned, Josephine was organizing her notes for the next edition when the bell above the door jingled. She looked up to find Gabriel Zane standing in her office, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place among the papers and ink. "Mr. Zane," she said, surprised. "I didn't know you were in town." "Gabriel," he reminded her with a small smile, "just delivered some horses to the livery." He glanced around the office. "You've made quite a transformation here." "Thank you," Josephine replied, suddenly aware of her ink-stained fingers and disheveled hair. "It's coming along." Gabriel produced a copy of the Chronicle from his coat. "I see I made the paper." "All factual reporting," Josephine assured him. "Your cattle truly are superior, according to Butcher Davis." "I wasn't complaining." Gabriel's eyes crinkled with amusement. "It's good to see the Chronicle up and running so quickly. The town needed this." "It's been a good fit," Josephine admitted. "People here are hungry for news, eager to see their community grow. They've been remarkably welcoming. I'm glad to hear it." Gabriel hesitated, then added, "I hoped you'd find what you were looking for here." Something in his tone made Josephine study him more closely. "Was that your intention all along, when you offered the building?" Gabriel shook his head. "I didn't know what you'd decide. I just knew you deserved the chance to continue your work somewhere it would be valued." The simple honesty of his statement touched her. "Well, I'm grateful," both for the opportunity and for your confidence in me. I read your articles, he admitted. From Redemption Creek, Martha found some copies among your things when she was helping with laundry that first day. Hope you don't mind. Josephine felt a flash of vulnerability. Those articles represented her most passionate work, her stand against injustice regardless of the personal cost. And what did you think? I thought they were brave, Gabriel said quietly, clear-eyed about corruption but never cruel. The mark of a true journalist. Their eyes met across the counter, and Josephine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the late summer heat. I should let you get back to work, Gabriel said, breaking the moment. Just wanted to say the paper's a fine addition to Silver Creek. Will you stay in town tonight? Josephine asked, surprising herself with the question. I had planned to head back before dark. The hotel serves a decent dinner, she found herself saying. If you'd care to join me, I'd welcome your insights on local matters. For the paper, she added quickly. Gabriel's smile widened. I'd be honored to provide insights for the Chronicle. Dinner it is then. 6 o'clock. Perfect, Josephine agreed, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. Purely professional, of course, Gabriel echoed, though his eyes suggested otherwise. Until then, Miss Editor. As he left, Josephine touched the front page of her newspaper, feeling a surge of pride. The Silver Creek Chronicle was taking root, and so, perhaps, was she. Dinner with Gabriel became a regular occurrence whenever he visited Silver Creek, which happened with increasing frequency as autumn approached. What began as discussions about town affairs gradually expanded to include personal histories, shared literary interests, and eventually, dreams for the future. Josephine learned that Gabriel had fought briefly in the latter days of the Civil War, too young to see much combat, but old enough to understand its costs. He'd returned west with his father, helping to establish the ranch that was now his life's work. Books were his companions during the long winter months, and he subscribed to newspapers from as far away as Chicago and San Francisco. In turn, she shared stories of growing up in her father's newspaper office in Pennsylvania, learning to set type before she could properly write, and the journey west after her mother's death. She spoke of her determination to use journalism as a force for good, even as she acknowledged its limitations. Words alone can't change the world, she told him one evening as they walked along Silver Creek's Main Street after dinner, but they can change minds, and minds change worlds. Is that why you keep writing those editorials about the school fund? Gabriel asked. 3 weeks running now. Josephine smiled ruefully. You noticed. Hard not to. Education. Silver Creek's future was particularly compelling. The town needs a proper schoolhouse before winter, Josephine insisted. Children can't learn effectively in that drafty cabin, and the teacher deserves better conditions. I agree, Gabriel said. In fact, I've donated lumber from my property for the project. Josephine stopped walking to look at him. You have. That's not in this week's list of contributors. I asked Jenkins not to include it, Gabriel explained. It's not about recognition. It's about the children, Josephine finished for him. You're a good man, Gabriel Zane. Under the glow of the lamplight, she could see color rise in his face. I try to be, he said simply. They had reached the newspaper office where Josephine now lived above her business. Gabriel had never ventured upstairs, maintaining a respectful distance despite their growing friendship. Would you like to come in for coffee? She asked impulsively. Gabriel's expression softened. I would, but it's getting late and I have an early start tomorrow. He took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar between them. I'll be back in a week with that interview you wanted with the old-timer who remembers the first silver strike. Josephine nodded, ignoring her disappointment. Safe travels, then. Gabriel hesitated, then raised her hand to his lips in a brief, warm kiss. Until next week, Josephine. As she watched him walk toward the livery where his horse was stabled, Josephine acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Gabriel Zane. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She'd come to Silver Creek to rebuild her career, not to lose her heart to a rancher with kind eyes and a respect for truth. Yet as she prepared that week's edition, Josephine found herself including more articles about ranching concerns, beef prices, and the importance of responsible land management. If readers noticed the shift in coverage, none commented except Martha Cooper, who arrived unexpectedly one morning bearing a basket of baked goods and knowing smiles. "Gabriel asked me to bring these by," Martha said, placing fresh muffins on the counter. "He mentioned you often work through meals." "That's thoughtful of him," Josephine replied, acutely aware of Martha's scrutiny. Martha hummed noncommittally. "He's been quite thoughtful lately, making extra trips to town, reading poetry in the evenings, asking my opinion on women's preferences in jewelry." Josephine nearly dropped her typesetting tools. "Jewelry?" Martha's eyes twinkled. "Did I say jewelry? My mistake, old age affecting my memory, no doubt." She patted Josephine's hand. "The paper looks wonderful, dear. You've made quite an impact here in just a few months." "I hope so," Josephine said earnestly. "There's so much potential in Silver Creek if people work together toward common goals." "Like the new schoolhouse," Martha nodded. "I saw your editorials, very persuasive." "The town council finally approved additional funding yesterday," Josephine said proudly. "Construction begins next week." "And I hear you're planning something about the miners' working conditions," Josephine nodded, setting down her tools. "There have been 3 accidents in the North Mine this month alone. The owner claims they're isolated incidents, but I've spoken with miners who say safety procedures are being ignored to increase production." "Be careful, dear," Martha cautioned. "Mine owners aren't known for their love of scrutiny." "I'm always careful," Josephine assured her. "I have documentation, multiple sources, and I've requested comment from the owner himself. Everything will be factual and fair." Martha studied her with a mixture of pride and concern. "You remind me of Gabriel's father. Thomas had the same unwavering commitment to doing what was right, regardless of consequence. Gabriel speaks of him with great respect, as he should. Thomas Zane was the finest man I've known." Martha's expression grew distant. "He taught Gabriel that a man's integrity is his most valuable possession, that some principles are worth fighting for, even at great cost." "Is that why Gabriel has been so supportive of the Chronicle? Because of his father's influence?" Martha smiled gently. "Partly. But I suspect his interest in the newspaper has more to do with its editor than its principles these days." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We're friends, Martha. He values independent journalism." "Of course he does," Martha agreed, eyes twinkling. "Well, I should let you get back to your work. Those muffins will keep for days if stored properly." As Martha departed, Josephine returned to her typesetting, but her mind kept wandering to Gabriel and the approaching winter. Silver Creek would soon be isolated by snow, travel between town and outlying ranches difficult if not impossible for weeks at a time. The thought of not seeing Gabriel for so long created an ache she hadn't anticipated when settling here. 3 days later, Josephine published her exposé on mine safety. The headline read, "Danger Below. Workers report safety violations at North Silver Mine," accompanied by detailed accounts from miners, statistics on accidents, and expert opinions on proper mining protocols. By mid-morning, Frederick Hargrove, owner of the North Silver Mining Company, burst into her office, the newspaper clutched in his fist. "What is the meaning of this slander?" he demanded, slapping the paper onto her counter. Josephine remained seated, her posture deliberately calm despite her racing heart. Hargrove was a powerful man, known for his temper and influence. "Good morning, Mr. Hargrove. If you found factual errors in the article, I'm happy to discuss them." "This entire piece is designed to damage my business," Hargrove sputtered, "quoting disgruntled workers and so-called experts who have never set foot in my mine." "Every source is documented," Josephine replied evenly. "I requested your comment multiple times before publication. You declined to respond, because these accusations are beneath dignifying with a response." Hargrove's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "I'll have you know I've operated mines for 20 years without interference from meddling women playing at journalism." The door opened behind him, and several patrons from the nearby cafe entered, curious about the commotion. Josephine noticed Harold Jenkins among them and nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice steady, "the Chronicle reports facts. 3 men have been injured in your mine this month. Workers report being told to ignore safety protocols to increase production. These are not accusations I've invented, but testimonies from your own employees." "Testimonies you've solicited and twisted," Hargrove countered. "I won't stand for it. Retract this article immediately or face consequences." "Are you threatening me, Mr. Hargrove?" Josephine asked, loud enough for the gathering onlookers to hear. Hargrove glanced around, suddenly aware of their audience. He lowered his voice but couldn't disguise his anger. "I'm warning you, Miss Rollins. Silver Creek isn't as welcoming to troublemakers as you might think. We were doing just fine before you arrived with your crusading notions." "Is worker safety a crusading notion?" Josephine challenged. "Would you send your own son into that mine under current conditions?" Hargrove's expression hardened. "You've made a mistake crossing me. This town needs my mine more than it needs your newspaper." He turned to leave, nearly colliding with Gabriel, who stood in the doorway. "Problem here?" Gabriel asked quietly, his gaze moving from Hargrove to Josephine. "Nothing that concerns you, Zane," Hargrove snapped. "I disagree," Gabriel replied, stepping aside to let the mine owner pass. "Everything in Silver Creek concerns its citizens." Hargrove departed with a final glare at Josephine. The onlookers dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves. "You all right?" Gabriel asked, approaching the counter. Josephine released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I'm fine, just another day in journalism." "Hargrove's not someone to take lightly," Gabriel cautioned. "He has connections in the territorial capital, friends in high places." "So I've heard," Josephine acknowledged. "But the facts are the facts. 3 men injured, 1 nearly killed, all because proper supports weren't installed and gas detection procedures weren't followed." Gabriel nodded slowly. "I read the article. Thorough work. Thank you." Josephine's hands trembled slightly as she organized papers on her desk. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "I didn't expect you until later in the week." "Finished my business early," Gabriel said, studying her with concern. "Glad I did." "I don't need protection, Gabriel. Never thought you did." A small smile played at his lips. "But even the most capable people occasionally benefit from having allies." The simple declaration warmed her. "Well, I appreciate the alliance." "Good." Gabriel glanced at the wall clock. "Have you eaten today?" Josephine realized she hadn't. "I've been rather busy." "Then perhaps you'll join me for lunch. The cafe has a new cook who apparently makes an excellent stew." "I should really finish the layout for next week's edition," Josephine protested weakly. Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "The editor should set a good example of self-care for her readers, shouldn't she? An undernourished journalist is hardly at her best." Josephine couldn't help but laugh. "Using my own editorial logic against me, that's hardly sporting." "All's fair in pursuit of a proper meal," Gabriel replied, offering his arm. "Shall we?" As they walked to the cafe, Josephine was acutely aware of eyes following them. Her confrontation with Hargrove would be town gossip by nightfall, as would her lunch with Gabriel Zane. "People are watching us," she murmured. "People always watch," Gabriel replied. "It's human nature. It complicates things." Gabriel glanced down at her, his expression softening. "Some things are worth complications." The simple statement lingered between them as they entered the cafe, a promise of conversations yet to come. The weeks following Josephine's article brought both challenge and unexpected support. Frederick Hargrove made good on his threats, pressuring merchants to withdraw their advertising from the Chronicle. Several did, fearing repercussions for their businesses. But for every advertiser who withdrew, another seemed to appear, including ranchers from outlying areas who had never advertised before. Most surprising was the arrival of miners themselves, coming individually or in small groups to thank Josephine for bringing their concerns to light. Some even contributed small sums toward advertising space dedicated to mine safety information. "We've taken up a collection," explained Tom Brannigan, a grizzled foreman who visited the Chronicle office one October afternoon. "The men want folks to know the truth, not just what Hargrove says." "Has anything changed at the mine?" Josephine asked, accepting the coins he placed on her counter. Brannigan nodded. Territorial inspector arrived yesterday. Suddenly, we've got new support beams being installed and twice daily gas checks. Funny how that works. I'm glad to hear it, Josephine said sincerely. That was the goal, safer conditions, not punishing Mr. Hargrove. Well, he feels punished all right, Brannigan chuckled. Never seen the man so red-faced. But between you and me, Miss Rollins, most of us think it's about time someone stood up to him. After Brannigan left, Josephine sat at her desk, reflecting on the unexpected turn of events. She had published the truth, facing the same kind of intimidation that had driven her from Redemption Creek. But this time, the outcome was different. This time, she had allies. Chief among them was Gabriel, who had become both her most stalwart supporter and her closest friend. He visited Silver Creek at least weekly now, often bringing news from outlying areas or introducing her to people with stories worth telling. His ranch hands had become Chronicle subscribers, and Martha regularly sent baked goods for Josephine to share with visitors to the newspaper office. More than that, Gabriel had become her confidant, the person with whom she shared both her triumphs and doubts. Their conversations ranged from the practical challenges of frontier journalism to philosophical discussions about truth and responsibility. And increasingly, they spoke of personal matters, hopes, memories, the quiet longings that shaped their lives. On a crisp November day, with the first snow dusting the mountains, Gabriel arrived at the Chronicle office with a proposal that would change everything. I've been thinking, he said without preamble as he entered, bringing with him the scent of pine and cold air. A dangerous pastime, Josephine teased, looking up from her desk where she was editing letters for the next edition. Gabriel smiled, removing his hat. Perhaps. But necessary nonetheless. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. You know winter's coming. I've noticed the frost on my windows each morning, Josephine replied dryly. Hard to miss. Travel will become difficult, sometimes impossible, Gabriel continued. Between the ranch and town, Josephine felt a pang of the same concern that had been troubling her. I know. I've been wondering how the Chronicle will get news from outlying areas once the snow deepens. That's actually related to what I wanted to discuss. Gabriel took a deep breath. I have a proposition for you, a business proposition, he added quickly. I'm listening. Josephine set aside her work, intrigued. The ranch needs better representation in territorial affairs, water rights, grazing permits, that sort of thing. And the Chronicle needs regular news from beyond Silver Creek, especially during winter. True on both counts, Josephine agreed, unsure where this was leading. So I thought perhaps we might help each other, Gabriel said. A formal arrangement. The Chronicle becomes the official voice of Zane Ranch interests in territorial matters, and in exchange I provide regular dispatches from outlying areas, regardless of weather. Josephine considered this. How would you manage the latter during snowstorms? I've thought about that, Gabriel replied. I'd station men at key locations before winter sets in. They'd gather news and relay it via a system of riders we've used for years to maintain contact between isolated homesteads. That's actually quite ingenious, Josephine admitted. But I'm not sure about making the Chronicle an official voice for any private interest. It compromises journalistic integrity. Not advocacy, Gabriel clarified, just accurate reporting on issues affecting ranchers. Water access, predator control, transportation concerns all matters of public interest anyway. And what would this partnership entail practically? Josephine asked, her journalistic instincts aroused. Would you expect editorial control? God, no, Gabriel looked genuinely horrified at the suggestion. I'd never presume to tell you what to print. The arrangement would be purely about information exchange. Your editorial independence remains absolute. Josephine studied him, noting the earnestness in his expression. This seems like a lot of effort and expense for news delivery, Gabriel. Are you certain it's worth it? Gabriel held her gaze. I believe in what you're doing here, Josephine. The Chronicle gives voice to people who wouldn't otherwise be heard. It holds the powerful accountable. It helps this community understand itself and its challenges. He paused. And selfishly, I've come to value our conversations. I'd prefer not to lose them for months at a time. The admission hung between them, more significant than the business proposal itself. Josephine felt her heart quicken. I see, she said softly. Well, your proposal has merit. I'll need to consider the details, of course. Of course, Gabriel agreed. Take all the time you need. He hesitated, then added, There's one other matter I'd like to discuss if you're amenable. Yes. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the harvest dance this Saturday as my guest, he clarified. Not as a journalist covering the event. Josephine couldn't suppress her smile. Are you asking me to attend socially, Mr. Zane? I am indeed, Miss Rollins, Gabriel replied, his own smile growing, though I recognize it might create talk. Everything creates talk in a small town, Josephine observed, particularly when it involves the local newspaper editor. Is that a yes? Gabriel pressed gently. Josephine considered only briefly. Yes, I would be delighted to attend the dance with you, Gabriel. The relief and pleasure that crossed his face was worth whatever gossip might follow. Excellent, I'll call for you at 7 if that suits. Perfectly, Josephine agreed. And regarding your business proposal, let me draft some terms. We can discuss them after the dance. I look forward to it, Gabriel said, replacing his hat. Until Saturday, then. As he left, Josephine allowed herself a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Whatever came of their business arrangement, something more significant was taking root between them, something she had neither expected nor sought when she arrived in Silver Creek, but which now seemed as essential as the words she committed to paper each week. The harvest dance transformed the newly completed schoolhouse into a whirl of color and music. Lanterns hung from beams, casting warm light over tables laden with food brought by local families. A small band played lively tunes as couples circled the cleared space that served as a dance floor. Josephine had agonized over her appearance more than she cared to admit. Her options were limited. Frontier life didn't allow for an extensive wardrobe, but she had one dress saved for special occasions. Made of deep blue wool with modest lace at the collar and cuffs, it complemented her auburn hair and green eyes. She'd arranged her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical braid, with a few curls framing her face. Gabriel's expression when he arrived to escort her suggested her efforts were not in vain. He stood in her doorway, momentarily speechless before finding his voice. Josephine, he said finally, you look beautiful. Thank you, she replied, feeling uncharacteristically shy. Gabriel himself cut a striking figure in a clean black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His dark blonde hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard for the occasion. He offered his arm, which she took, and together they walked the short distance to the schoolhouse. The night air was crisp with the promise of winter, stars brilliant in the clear sky above. Nervous? Gabriel asked as they approached the brightly lit building. About dancing. Not particularly, Josephine replied. About being the subject of every conversation for the next week. Perhaps a little, Gabriel chuckled. We could give them something more interesting to discuss than our arrival together. I'm afraid to ask what you're suggesting, Josephine said, giving him a sidelong glance. Nothing scandalous, he assured her, eyes twinkling, though I admit the thought has crossed my mind. Their entrance did indeed cause a momentary lull in conversation, followed by a buzz of interest that spread through the room. But the welcome they received was warm, with many townsfolk coming forward to greet them. Miss Rollins, so glad you could join us, Harold Jenkins said, approaching with his wife. And Mr. Zane, welcome. Your contribution to the schoolhouse is much appreciated. It's a fine building, Gabriel acknowledged, a credit to the town. As the evening progressed, Josephine found herself enjoying the celebration more than she had anticipated. Gabriel proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her through waltzes and lively reels with equal skill. Between dances, they sampled the abundant food and chatted with townspeople, many of whom expressed their support for the Chronicle. Your article about the mine made a real difference, Susan Brannigan, the foreman's wife, told her quietly. Tom says they're finally getting proper equipment. Our oldest boy works there too. I sleep better knowing someone's watching out for them. During a break in the music, Gabriel led Josephine outside to a small porch that had been added to the schoolhouse entrance. The night had grown colder and he placed his jacket around her shoulders without being asked. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he inquired, standing close beside her. "Very much," Josephine admitted. "It's nice to be part of the community this way. Usually I'm observing, taking notes. And tonight I'm just present," she said thoughtfully. "Participating rather than documenting." Gabriel nodded. "It suits you, this happiness." Josephine turned to look at him, struck by the tenderness in his voice. "Does it?" "Very much so," he replied softly. In the lantern light, his eyes were impossibly blue. Josephine felt the world narrow to just this moment, just this man standing before her with an expression that made her heart race. "Gabriel," she began, unsure what she meant to say. "I'm falling in love with you, Josephine," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "I thought you should know." Josephine caught her breath. Though their growing closeness had suggested as much, hearing the words spoken aloud changed everything. You don't need to say anything," Gabriel assured her. "I don't expect declarations in return. I just wanted you to understand where I stand." "Let me speak, Gabriel Zane," Josephine said, finding her voice. "I've spent my life believing that truth matters above all else. So here's my truth. I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me and exhilarates me in equal measure." Gabriel's face transformed with joy. "Terrifies you? I came here to rebuild my career, not to lose my heart," Josephine explained. "I've always defined myself by my work, my independence. Loving someone complicates that." "It doesn't have to," Gabriel said earnestly. "Your work, your independence, they're part of who you are, part of what I admire. I would never ask you to diminish yourself." Josephine studied him, recognizing the sincerity in his words. Most men would. "I'm not most men," Gabriel replied simply, "and you're not most women." The music from inside had resumed, a slow waltz floating through the night air. Gabriel held out his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Editor?" Josephine placed her hand in his, feeling as though she was stepping across a threshold into something new and wonderful. "You may indeed, Mr. Rancher." They danced on the small porch under the stars, moving together as if they'd done so 1,000 times before. When the music ended, Gabriel didn't release her. Instead, he drew her closer, his gaze questioning. Josephine answered by rising on her toes to press her lips to his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with shared longing. His arms encircled her waist and hers wound around his neck, the warmth of their embrace a contrast to the cold night air. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day you stood up to Hargrove in your office." Josephine laughed softly. "Really, I was disheveled and ink-stained." "You were magnificent," Gabriel corrected. "Fearless in defense of truth. How could I not fall in love with that?" Inside, the band struck up another tune and voices called for dancers to return. "Shall we go back?" Josephine asked, though part of her wished to remain in this perfect moment. Gabriel nodded, taking her hand. "We should, but Josephine—" "Yes, this conversation isn't finished," he said, his eyes reflecting both promise and question. "No," she agreed, squeezing his hand. "It's just beginning." The following weeks brought changes, both public and private, to Josephine's life. The Chronicle published its first Rural Dispatch column, featuring news gathered through Gabriel's network of ranch hands stationed at key locations throughout the region. Readers responded enthusiastically to the expanded coverage, and subscriptions increased even as winter tightened its grip on the territory. More significant were the changes in her personal life. Gabriel now visited Silver Creek almost daily, weather permitting. Their relationship, conducted with frontier propriety but no attempt at secrecy, became a source of general approval among townsfolk. Josephine found herself welcomed into social circles that had previously viewed her with professional respect but personal distance. Even Frederick Hargrove, while never warm, had moderated his hostility. The presence of territorial mining inspectors, a direct result of Josephine's reporting, had led to improved conditions, and somewhat ironically, increased productivity as fewer accidents meant fewer disruptions. "You've changed this town," Gabriel told her one evening as they sat before the fire in her small apartment above the newspaper office. Outside, December winds drove snow against the windows, but inside was warmth and contentment. The town was ready for change, Josephine demurred. "I just happened to arrive at the right moment." Gabriel shook his head. "You give yourself too little credit. Your courage gave others permission to speak their own truths." Josephine smiled, accepting the compliment. "Perhaps, though your support made that courage considerably easier to maintain." "Speaking of support," Gabriel said, setting aside his coffee cup, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." "The rural dispatches, they're working wonderfully," Josephine assured him. "Yes, but I've been considering an expansion." Gabriel's expression was carefully neutral, but Josephine detected an undercurrent of excitement. "What would you think about a second newspaper?" Josephine blinked in surprise. "A competitor to the Chronicle?" "No, a sister publication," Gabriel clarified. "The Territorial Gazette, perhaps." "Published monthly, focusing on issues affecting the entire region, not just Silver Creek. Land policy, mining regulations, railroad development matters that impact communities across the territory but rarely get comprehensive coverage." "That's an ambitious idea," Josephine said slowly, her mind already racing with possibilities. "The Chronicle would remain your primary focus," Gabriel continued, "but the Gazette would allow you to address larger issues, reach a broader audience. I've spoken with merchants in Helena and Virginia City who have expressed interest in advertising." "You've been planning this for some time," Josephine observed, not sure whether to be impressed or annoyed that he'd developed the concept so thoroughly without consulting her. Gabriel had the grace to look slightly abashed. "I wanted to be certain it was viable before presenting it to you. The idea itself, though, is entirely inspired by your work." "How so?" "Your reporting on the mine safety issues had repercussions beyond Silver Creek," Gabriel explained. "The territorial governor mentioned it specifically when announcing new inspection protocols for all mines. It showed me how powerful your journalism could be on a larger stage." Josephine considered the proposal, excitement building despite her initial reservations. "A monthly publication would require additional staff, a larger press." "I've accounted for those costs in my projections," Gabriel assured her. "The initial investment would be significant, but based on potential advertising revenue and subscriptions, the Gazette could be self-sustaining within a year." "And who would own this publication?" Josephine asked, the essential question finally emerging. "You would," Gabriel replied without hesitation, "editorially and legally. My role would be financial partner only with no control over content." Josephine studied him, recognizing both the generosity of the offer and the implications behind it. "Gabriel, I'm not sure what to say. The opportunity is extraordinary, but you're wondering why I would propose such an arrangement," Gabriel finished for her. "Yes." Gabriel moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking both her hands in his. "Because I believe in you, Josephine. Because your voice deserves the widest possible audience, and because I want to build something meaningful with you, not just a business, but a life." The declaration hung in the air between them, its significance unmistakable. Josephine felt tears spring to her eyes. "Gabriel, are you?" "Not yet," he said gently. "Not formally. That will come if you're willing. But first I wanted you to understand that whatever future we might have together, your work, your calling would be central to it. Not something to be abandoned or diminished, but expanded, strengthened." Josephine was speechless, overwhelmed by both the business proposition and the deeper promise it represented. Gabriel Zane, this remarkable man who had entered her life when she was at her lowest point, wasn't asking her to choose between her profession and a life with him. He was offering a vision where both could flourish together. "You once told me you came to Silver Creek to rebuild your career, not to lose your heart," Gabriel reminded her softly. "I'm suggesting you don't have to choose." Josephine reached out to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "You are a most unusual man, Gabriel Zane. Is that a favorable observation?" he asked, smiling slightly. "Exceedingly favorable," Josephine assured him, "and your proposal, both the stated and implied versions, deserve serious consideration. I hoped you might think so." Gabriel rose, pulling her gently to her feet with him. "Take all the time you need for the former. As for the latter," he drew her into his arms. "I find myself growing increasingly impatient." "Patience is a virtue, Mr. Zane," Josephine teased, though her heart was racing. "So I've been told, Miss Rollins," he murmured, lowering his mouth to hers. "But even virtuous men have their limits." Their kiss deepened, communicating feelings too profound for words. When they finally parted, Josephine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Gabriel," she said simply, the words feeling right and true. "And yes, I want to build something with you, a newspaper, a life, a future." Gabriel's arms tightened around her. "Is that a yes to the Territorial Gazette?" "It's a yes to everything," Josephine replied. "Though I'll want to review those financial projections thoroughly before we proceed." Gabriel laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest. "I would expect nothing less from the Territory's most meticulous journalist." As snow continued to fall outside, insulating Silver Creek from the wider world, Josephine and Gabriel talked long into the night, planning a future that neither could have imagined 6 months earlier. The Territorial Gazette took shape in their conversation, its format, content, distribution alongside more personal dreams of a shared life. When Gabriel finally departed, with a kiss that promised countless more to come, Josephine stood at her window watching his figure move through the swirling snow toward the hotel. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the painful expulsion from Redemption Creek, the chance encounter with a rancher who valued truth as much as she did, the unexpected flowering of both professional opportunity and personal joy. Words had always been her tools, her weapons, her means of making sense of the world. Now they were building something she had never dared to imagine. A life founded on truth, strengthened by love, and expansive enough to encompass all she hoped to become. Spring brought renewal to Silver Creek and to Josephine's life. As winter's grip relaxed, revealing muddy streets and the first green shoots of new growth, changes both public and private unfolded with startling rapidity. The first edition of the Territorial Gazette launched in April 1874, coinciding with the installation of a new, larger printing press in the expanded Chronicle office. The monthly publication, with its distinctive masthead proclaiming truth across the territory, quickly attracted attention beyond Silver Creek. Orders arrived from as far as Helena and Bozeman, and within 2 months, circulation exceeded even Gabriel's optimistic projections. More significant was the change in Josephine's personal circumstances. On a clear May morning, with the mountains still capped in snow but valleys lush with new growth, she became Mrs. Josephine Zane in a simple ceremony attended by much of Silver Creek and neighboring ranches. "I, Gabriel, take you, Josephine, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Gabriel had said, his voice steady and sure as they stood before Reverend Taylor in the schoolhouse that had hosted their first dance. "I promise to support your work, defend your right to speak truth, and build our life on a foundation of honesty and respect." Josephine, wearing a new dress of ivory silk ordered from San Francisco at Martha's insistence, had responded with equally meaningful vows. "I, Josephine, take you, Gabriel, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to share my truths with you first, to remember that our partnership strengthens rather than diminishes my independence, and to build with you a home where honesty is always welcomed." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and a feast that showcased the best of local cooking. When Gabriel finally escorted his bride to the hotel where they would spend their first night as husband and wife, cheers and good wishes followed them down Main Street. "Are you happy, Mrs. Zane?" Gabriel asked as they stood alone in their room, the sounds of continued celebration drifting through the open window. Josephine looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Unutterably so, Mr. Zane." "No regrets about maintaining your professional name for the newspapers?" Gabriel's expression held no censure, only genuine curiosity. None, Josephine assured him. The Chronicle and Gazette were established under Rollins. It makes business sense to maintain that consistency. She reached up to touch his face. But I am proud to be Josephine Zane in all other aspects of life. As I am proud to be your husband, Gabriel replied, drawing her closer, in all aspects of life. What followed was a night of tender discovery, of promises fulfilled and new ones made, of two independent souls finding that unity strengthened rather than diminished their separate selves. Morning found them planning their future with typical pragmatism. They would divide their time between the ranch and town, with Josephine based primarily at the newspaper offices while Gabriel managed the ranch. Martha would continue to oversee the ranch house, which would be expanded to include a proper study for Josephine. I've been thinking, Gabriel said as they shared breakfast in their hotel room, about establishing a small printing operation at the ranch as well. Nothing elaborate, just enough that you could work from home when weather makes travel difficult. Josephine smiled at his thoughtfulness. That would be wonderful, though I hope you realize this means you'll never escape editing duties, even at home. I consider it an honor, Gabriel replied with mock solemnity. Besides, I've developed quite an aptitude for proofreading, if I do say so myself. Indeed you have, Josephine agreed. Which reminds me we need to discuss the Gazette's coverage of the proposed railroad extension. I've received conflicting reports about potential routes. And so began their married life professional concerns, seamlessly interwoven with personal ones, each supporting the other's work while building something larger together. The people of Silver Creek quickly grew accustomed to seeing Gabriel at the newspaper office, setting type or discussing articles with his wife, just as they accepted Josephine's presence at cattle auctions and ranch association meetings. Summer brought increased circulation for both publications and an unexpected letter that arrived on a dusty July afternoon. Josephine was alone in the office, preparing the next day's edition of the Chronicle, when Harold Jenkins entered with the mail. Special delivery from Redemption Creek, he announced, placing the envelope on her desk. Came through on the Helena stage. Josephine stared at the return address, her heart quickening. Thank you, Harold. After he left, she sat for several minutes with the unopened letter before her. The name in the corner, James Wilson, attorney at law, was unfamiliar. But the town name awakened memories both painful and formative. Finally, with steady hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. Dear Mrs. Zane, formerly Miss Rollins, I write to inform you of recent developments in Redemption Creek, which may be of interest given your former residence and professional activities here. Mayor Williams and several town council members have been indicted for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy following a territorial investigation. The investigation was prompted by documents provided to the governor's office earlier this year, specifically copies of articles you published, accompanied by additional evidence compiled by several citizens who were inspired by your example to document ongoing abuses. The property seized from you, including the building that housed the Redemption Creek Herald, has been determined to have been unlawfully taken. As the legal owner of record, you are entitled to reclaim this property or to receive fair market compensation. If you wish to pursue either option, please contact my office at your earliest convenience. Several community members have also expressed interest in reviving the Herald under new ownership, should you be willing to provide guidance or consultation. Regardless of your decision, I have been asked by numerous citizens to convey their admiration for your courage in speaking truth when others remained silent. Your words, it seems, planted seeds that continued to grow long after your departure. Respectfully yours, James Wilson, Esq. Josephine read the letter twice, emotions washing over her in waves. Vindication, certainly, but more than that, a profound sense that her work, her sacrifice, had mattered in ways she couldn't have foreseen when she was forced to leave Redemption Creek. She was still sitting at her desk, letter in hand, when Gabriel arrived an hour later. Josephine, he asked, noting her distracted expression. Is everything all right? Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. He read it carefully, his face revealing increasing satisfaction. "Justice at last," he said when he finished. "Though long overdue, it wasn't about justice for me," Josephine replied slowly, realizing the truth as she spoke. "It was about telling the truth, regardless of consequence." "And the truth prevailed," Gabriel pointed out, setting the letter down. "Because you refused to be silenced." Josephine nodded, her mind already racing ahead. "The Herald should be revived. Redemption Creek deserves a newspaper that serves the community, not powerful interests." She looked up at her husband. "I should write to this Mr. Wilson, offer to help them establish a new publication." Gabriel smiled, recognizing the familiar fire in her eyes. "Of course you should, though I hope you're not planning to relocate to Redemption Creek." "My home is here," Josephine assured him, rising to embrace him. "My life is with you, but I can still help them start anew, provide guidance, perhaps some equipment from our expanded operation." "Always thinking of the next edition," Gabriel teased gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's one of the many reasons I love you." "Not the only reason, I hope," Josephine replied, her arms tightening around his waist. "Not by far," Gabriel assured her, lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that spoke of passion undiminished by months of marriage. "Though your dedication to truth does rank highly on a very long list." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their newly expanded ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the painful expulsion from Redemption Creek, to finding unexpected sanctuary with a rancher who valued truth as much as she did, to building not just one successful newspaper but two, and most precious of all, creating a partnership based on mutual respect and deep love. "Penny for your thoughts," Gabriel said, his hand finding hers as they sat side by side. "I was just thinking about how being cast out for speaking truth led me directly to you," Josephine replied. "How what seemed like an ending was actually a beginning." Gabriel nodded, understanding as he always did. The best stories often work that way. "And we're still writing ours," Josephine observed, leaning against his shoulder. "Chapter by chapter," Gabriel agreed, his arm encircling her, "though I think I already know the theme, which is truth endures," he said simply. "In words printed on a page, in promises made between two people, in the legacy we create together." As night descended on the Montana landscape, Josephine Rollins Zane, journalist, wife, and truth-teller, recognized the wisdom in her husband's words. She had been cast out for speaking truth, but that same truth had led her to a man who built his life, and now their shared life on her words. Not just the words she wrote for public consumption, but the private truths they exchanged daily, building a foundation stronger than any adversity could shake. In the years that followed, the Chronicle and the Gazette would expand their reach across the territory. Josephine would mentor a new generation of journalists, including the editor of the revived Redemption Creek Herald. Gabriel would become a respected voice in territorial affairs, advocating for policies that protected small ranchers and farmers. Together, they would raise two children who inherited their mother's passion for truth and their father's commitment to building rather than taking. But the essence of their story was captured in that moment on the porch, with the day's last light gilding the world around them. Two people who recognized in each other not just love, but a shared belief that truth, however difficult, was the only foundation worth building upon. In a frontier filled with those seeking to reinvent themselves through deception, they had found redemption in honesty, strength in vulnerability, and a love made more powerful by its transparency. For Josephine and Gabriel Zane, truth was not just what they pursued professionally, it was how they lived, how they loved, and ultimately the legacy they would leave behind.